Let's have a look at Heidegger's Being and Time. Right from the start of Being and Time, Heidegger tells us that his main concern is going to be the question of being and its priority throughout the book. Heidegger wishes to explicitly restate the question of being which in his time had been forgotten. For Heidegger, the question of being was as old as Plato and Aristotle, yet somehow throughout history it was trivialized to the point that the meaning of being had become superfluous. This trivialization had made the question of being an unnecessary question for philosophers. Heidegger outlines three presuppositions according to which the question of being has become an unnecessary question. The first presupposition is that the concept of being is the most universal concept, and as such it is the emptiest concept. Thanks to Aristotelian logic, we know that there is an inverse relationship between intension and extension. The more objects the extension of a word embraces, the lower the number of the objects that fall under its intention. The second presupposition is that the concept of being is indefinable. This is the case because being cannot be derived from higher concepts by definition, nor can it be presented through lower ones. Heidegger agrees with this presupposition, and this is where his flirtation with irrationality comes into play. Since being is not like entities which can be defined, we cannot apply the rules of logic to it. Instead, we should rely on non-logical methods to find out the meaning of being. And the final presupposition is that the concept of being is self-evident. Therefore, we do not need to define it in order to be able to use it. To combat these presuppositions, Heidegger sets himself the task of formulating the meaning of being. Although everyone has a vague understanding of what being means based on how the concept is used on a daily basis, we need to investigate in order to find out more about being, and to do so, we first need to clarify the concept being. This argument might sound circular, but thanks to his irrationality, Heidegger sees no problem with it. As you will see in a moment, the circularity doesn't stop here. In our investigation, we need to interrogate entities, since being means the being of entities. The problem is we might not know from where we should start our investigation. If everything we can talk about is being, to which being should we give priority in order to discern the meaning of being? Heidegger proposes that we should start from ourselves because we are the ones who are investigating. The reason is phenomenological. Since we are the beings who look at things and perceive them, our interaction with things influences our understanding and the conception of being. In Heidegger's words, asking about the question of being is our mode of being. He uses the term Dasein to denote those entities who are concerned about being and can inquire. In other words, activity of taking a look at being arises from the average understanding of being in which we always operate and which in the end belongs to the essential constitution of Dasein itself. If you scrutinize what Heidegger is claiming, you might notice he is committing the logical fallacy of making a circular argument by trying to explain what being is by inquiring about Dasein and explain what Dasein is by inquiring about being. However, he saves his irrational system by claiming that such presupposing has nothing to do with laying down an axiom from which a sequence of presuppositions is deductively derived. Therefore, it is quite impossible for there to be any circular argument in formulating the question about the meaning of being. Basically, he is dodging the bullet by claiming that his way of inquiring is above logic. and therefore the logical laws of deduction do not apply to his system of thought. This attitude is not specific to the book Being and Time. He always claims that poetry and metaphysics are above logic and science. After abandoning rationality and the rules of logic, Heidegger takes the first step to distinguish between what is ontological and what is ontical. Ontological inquiry is concerned primarily with being. Ontical inquiry is concerned primarily with entities and the facts about them. Heidegger gives priority to ontological inquiry because it is more primordial. Consequently, the ontological is that which sets the a priori conditions for the possibility of the sciences. Nevertheless, no ontology can be adequate without having clarified the meaning of being. Therefore, Heidegger comes back to the issue of being and Dasein by telling us in what Dasein differs from other entities. Dasein is an entity which does not just occur among other entities. Rather, it is ontically distinguished by the fact that, in its very being, that being is an issue for it. But in that case, this is a constitutive state of Dasein's being, and this implies that Dasein, in its being, has a relationship towards that being, a relationship which itself is one of being. And this means further that there is some way in which Dasein understands itself in its being, and that to some degree it does so explicitly. It is peculiar to this entity that with and through its being, this being is disclosed to it. Understanding of being is itself a definite characteristic of Dasein's being. Dasein is ontically distinctive in that it is ontological. Furthermore, Dasein always comports itself to a kind of being that Heidegger calls existence. Just as the sciences are ways of being through which Dasein inquire about other entities, Dasein should also inquire about itself in an ontical fashion. Crucially, Dasein always understands itself in terms of its existence, in terms of a possibility of itself, to be itself or not itself. We should point out that only Dasein has possibilities, and whether he chooses his circumstances or whether he finds himself in those circumstances, Dasein always decides. If you have the possibility to do something and you do it, it is easy to see the role of decision and possibility in your action. But Heidegger also thinks that if you do something without consciously making a decision, you are still in a sense deciding by choosing to unwittingly go along. This is a Heideggerian twist on a concept originally proposed by Kierkegaard. As Kierkegaard sees it, whether you choose X or don't choose X, it does not matter because you become responsible for your decision either way. What makes Dasein such a good candidate as the subject of investigation is that it has three priorities. Firstly, it has an ontical priority since it is an entity whose being has the determinate character of existence. Secondly, it has an ontological priority because existence is thus determinative for it. Lastly, Dasein has an understanding of the being of all entities of a character other than its own. Therefore, it has a third priority as providing the ontico-ontological condition for the possibility of any ontologies.